There is a man or a woman you know who should have retired by now. By every reasonable external measure, the age, the savings, the years put in, the grandchildren who keep asking when they're going to have more time, they should have stopped, and they haven't. Not because they can't afford to, not because nobody has suggested it, but because every time the conversation comes up, something in them goes quiet and firm, in a way that closes the subject before it really opens. They are still working. At 68, at 72, at 75, still showing up, still needed, still, as far as they are concerned, exactly where they are supposed to be. My name is Betty, and today I want to talk about the boomer who never retired, not the one who kept working because the money wasn't there, though that story is real and worth its own conversation. The one who kept working because stopping felt like something they were not ready to name. What the research says about why this happens, what it actually costs, and whether the refusal to retire is the thing it looks like from the outside, or something considerably more complicated underneath. According to the Bureau of Labour Statistics, the labour force participation rate for adults aged 65 to 74 reached 26.8% in 2023, the highest it has been since the early 1960s. Among boomers specifically, a 2024 AARP survey found that 34% of workers over 65 say they plan to keep working indefinitely with no specific retirement date in mind, not because they are forced to, because they choose to. And when researchers asked them why, the answers that came back were not primarily about money, they were about identity, about purpose, about the particular fear, spoken or not, of a life without the structure they built themselves, and that they are not sure exists without them in it. That is the psychology worth looking at. The boomer generation came of age in an America where work was not just an economic activity, it was a moral one. You were what you did. The question people asked at every social gathering, "What do you do?" was not small talk. It was the primary sorting mechanism of adult life. A man who worked hard was a good man. A woman who contributed was a capable woman. The work was the proof of the person. And the boomer, who is now 70 and still working, absorbed that equation in their bones before they were old enough to question it. Which means retirement is not just a change in schedule, it is, in the deepest psychological sense, a change in identity. And identity, for the generation that was told you are what you do, is not something you put down easily. Research from the Stanford Center on Longevity found that adults who strongly tie their sense of self-worth to professional identity experience retirement as a form of symbolic loss, so significant that researchers describe it using language usually reserved for grief. That sounds extreme until you talk to the 71-year-old who says, quietly, that they don't know what they would do with themselves if they stopped. That is not hyperbole. That is an accurate description of a nervous system that has organized itself around a particular role for 40 years and genuinely does not know what it is without that role. The boomer who never retired is not being stubborn. They are being honest about something most retirement planning conversations never address, that financial readiness and psychological readiness are two completely different things, and you can have one without the other for a very long time. Here is what the day looks like for the boomer who is still working at 70. It starts early because it has always started early, and the earliness itself is part of what makes the day feel real. There is a reason to be up, there is somewhere to go, or someone expecting something from them by noon. The structure is not incidental, it is load-bearing. It holds the day together in a way that nothing the culture has offered as a substitute, hobbies, travel, grandchildren, volunteering, has quite been able to replicate, because the structure of work is not just about filling time. It is about being needed in a specific, measurable, externally confirmed way. The colleague who sends the email, the client who calls with a problem, the moment at the end of the week when something got done that wasn't done before and you were the reason it happened. That daily confirmation, quiet, routine, constant, is what the boomer who never retired is actually protecting. And it is not a small thing to protect. A 2023 study published in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology found that adults who continued working past traditional retirement age reported significantly higher scores on daily purpose, cognitive engagement, and social connectedness than adults who retired at the same age. They also reported lower rates of depression in the years immediately following traditional retirement age. The data is, on its face, an argument for exactly what these boomers are already doing, but there is a cost side to the ledger that deserves to be said plainly. The boomer who never retires often does so at the expense of things that have been quietly waiting. The travel that keeps getting deferred because work makes it complicated to be away. The relationship with the grandchildren that exists only in the margins of a schedule that hasn't really opened up. The health appointments that get moved around work rather than work getting moved around health appointments. The partner who retired 3 years ago and is quietly, patiently waiting for the person they were promised would show up when this was finally over. That waiting accumulates. And the boomer who keeps saying next year, after this project, once things slow down, is making a calculation with a hidden variable in it, the assumption that there will be time later, that the health will hold, that the energy will hold, that the later they keep deferring is guaranteed to arrive. It is not guaranteed, and somewhere, at 3 in the morning in a quiet house, most of them know that. There is a group inside this story that I want to name separately because their version of not retiring comes from a completely different place. The boomer woman who is still working at 70 or who returned to work after a caregiving gap and has not stopped since is often doing so not primarily for identity but for something more practical and more raw. After decades of caregiving and household management that was economically invisible, her retirement savings are frequently inadequate. A 2024 report from the National Institute on Retirement Security found that boomer women are 80% more likely than boomer men to be economically vulnerable in retirement. For many of these women, staying in the workforce is not a psychological choice. It is a financial necessity that happens to look, from the outside, like the same decision the man at the next desk is making for entirely different reasons. Both of them are still working. The psychology underneath is almost the opposite. Both of them deserve to have their actual story seen. Here is the piece about the boomer who chose to keep working that I think is most important to say. The work ethic that has kept them at the desk is the same thing that built houses, raised children, and kept institutions running through decades of change that required steady people. The refusal to stop is not a failure of imagination. It is the direct expression of a value system formed early and held consistently, and that produced real things in the world. The question worth sitting with, not as a criticism but as a genuine curiosity, is this: who are you when the work is not the answer? Not because the work was wrong, because the person underneath the worker has been waiting quietly for someone to ask. And that person, when they finally get room to answer, is almost always more interesting than they expected. They have opinions that have nothing to do with the job. They have a sense of humor that doesn't live in a conference room. They have things they have been wanting to learn, and places they have been wanting to go, and conversations they have been meaning to have for years. All of it has been patient. All of it is still there. AARP research from 2025 found that boomers who transitioned into retirement gradually, reducing hours slowly over time rather than stopping all at once, reported significantly better psychological outcomes than those who made an abrupt stop. The gradual version gave the identity time to reshape itself rather than asking it to simply disappear overnight. That is not compromise. That is wisdom about how human beings actually change. And the Cigna Health 2025 report found that adults who built at least one strong non-work identity before retirement, a creative pursuit, a community role, a relationship, tended with as much care as they gave their career, navigated the transition with measurably less distress. The work can stay for as long as it makes sense. But the self that exists alongside the work, and eventually instead of it, needs tending too. It has been waiting long enough. If you are the boomer who has not retired, I am not here to tell you to stop. What I want to say is this: the work is real, and what it built is real, and the person underneath it is also real, and worth knowing and has been patient for a very long time. Start thinking about who that person is while you still have the luxury of being curious about the answer, rather than frightened by it. And if you love a boomer who will not stop working, do not push them toward the door. Ask them instead what they are afraid will disappear when they walk through it. That question, asked with kindness, opens more than any argument ever will. A lot of you have been writing in about the people in your lives who fit this description exactly. The parent who still goes in at 74, the spouse who keeps saying just one more year, the neighbor who retired on paper but kept every client anyway. What you're describing is not stubbornness, and it is not workaholism in the clinical sense. It is a generation that was handed a definition of a good life and built that life faithfully for 50 years, and is now standing at an edge they were never given a map for. They deserve compassion for that, not impatience, and they deserve to be seen clearly, the choice and the cost of it, and the courage it will take to eventually set it down. Leave me a comment. Are you still working, or do you love someone who is? Tell me why. I really want to know. Thanks for being here with me.